Hello, dreamers, and welcome to this 305th episode of California Dreaming. And before we get into today's case, I have a few notes about the show. This is an independent, ad-free podcast, which means I depend on listener support to help keep us growing and to help us find new listeners. And there are a number of ways that you can help. You can leave a nice rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or whichever platforms you listen to your shows on. I'm also on YouTube, kind of sporadically. I'm still figuring it out, but you can go ahead and go over there and give it a subscribe. I don't do videos, so what will show up is if I decide to put an image of the person, the perpetrator, the victim, something like that, but it's still all just audio. Anyway, that will help give us more visibility and enables more potential listeners to find us. You can follow the show on social media, like the Facebook page, join the discussion group over there as well. I'm also on Instagram and X, not so much on X anymore, but every once in a while I'll pop over there because that's where I have the most followers. And whatever's happening on TikTok, I'm still there. If you'd like to help just a little bit more and you have a couple dollars each month to spare, you can become a premium supporter over on Patreon. Starting as low as $1 a month, you can enjoy access to hundreds of hours of content that you're not going to hear anywhere else. Patreon support has been dropping off a little bit lately, which is understandable. Some of it's my own fault, but I also regularly get complaints about not being able to listen to the episodes over there. I try to work through those issues with you individually as best as I can, and I will continue to do so. If you have a problem, even if you've emailed me previously, email me again so I can make sure that everyone is getting what they pay for. If every follower on Facebook and Instagram joined Patreon at the $1 tier, I would beyond meet the goal that I've been trying to reach over the years. So please consider supporting. In this upcoming year, it's the first episode of 2025. My goal is to have more frequent bonuses and premium bonuses on Patreon while keeping up with the free show on about a minimum of a bi-weekly pace. I'm going to try to do more frequently, but I have to also be realistic. These episodes are really long, so if you really think about it, if your average podcast episode is under an hour, most of mine are more than an hour and a half, sometimes more than 2 hours. And that's what's so time consuming, is writing that 2 hours worth of content. I'm going to try something different as 2025 moves along, and we'll see how it goes. But either way, no matter what I do, you will always have the same access to the show. It's always going to be ad-free, and it's always going to start at $1 over on Patreon. I'm not going to make any changes to that. That will never change. And this week, I would like to thank Debbie S. over there at True Crime University with her cute little pug, Nathan, Susie W., Diane, Rory C., Avery, James C., Logan M., Gina, Bo M., Lori P., Donna B., and Christine F. for either joining Patreon, raising their pledge, going annual, or making a contribution on PayPal, which you can do using my email, californiapod@gmail.com. Links to everything that I just mentioned are in the show notes. All right, let's get started with today's episode. I do have to provide you with this warning. This episode contains details involving the murder of a child. This may be difficult and triggering for some listeners. Listener discretion is strongly advised. I also want to say that this episode is going to be like a classic California Dreaming episode, with just the chronology and the details of the whole story start to finish. There are many hours of audio content of the person who committed this crime. That is frankly pretty overwhelming, but also really fascinating. In this episode, I'm going to discuss some of what she had to say in those interviews, but over on Patreon is where I am going to upload our recap and discussion episodes associated with those audio recordings, and those audio interrogations and interviews are also going to be over on Patreon. Don't worry though, you will get the entire story here with all the details that you know that I like to go over. But for all the crazy stuff that the criminal defendant in this case had to say in the interrogation room, all of that's going to be over on Patreon following this episode. So without further ado, this is the 305th episode of California Dreaming. We are discussing the 2020 murder of 11-year-old Gannon Stauch. This is a story that unfolded during COVID and beyond. In fact, the events all began on January 27th, 2020. News of COVID-19 had just started trickling through our feeds, but the very day before all of this happened, there was another big story in the news. Retired Lakers shooting guard Kobe Bryant, his daughter Gigi, pilot Ara Zabayan, John Altobelli, his wife Carrie, their daughter, and Gigi's teammate Alyssa, Sarah Chester, her daughter, also a teammate of Gigi's named Peyton, and team coach Christina Mauser, all perished when the helicopter they were flying in crashed into a mountainside in Calabasas, California. So that pretty much dominated the news until COVID restrictions and quarantine went into effect in March of 2020. And you all know, as it is well documented throughout this time, that my own personal life was falling apart. My marriage was in shambles. I moved to Nevada. My mom was diagnosed with terminal kidney failure, congestive heart failure, dementia, etc., etc. So I was definitely struggling to keep myself afloat for pretty much the next 4 years. So yeah, this case kind of flew past me, you know. It wasn't until I started binging interrogation videos on YouTube in 2022 and 2023 that I discovered this tragic story. And what drew me to it were some of the same things that drew me to Teresa Stone. The incredible way that these two talk and talk and talk for hours on end and offer absolutely nothing of substance to further the investigation in any way, shape, or form. Except I'd go so far to say that this woman that we're going to talk about today was worse. She was trying to say and do anything, and when I say anything, I mean anything, to mislead and hinder the investigation as much as she possibly could. I do feel like there were some very serious mistakes made at the onset of this story when it was first reported, because the suspect story, what she said to 911 and law enforcement when the whole ordeal kicked off, her word was taken at face value. It quickly changed, but the door was left open for potential reasonable doubt because of some of the investigative missteps. Fortunately, too many mistakes were made and too much evidence was left behind for that to really matter. What we are going to cover in this series, and I'm predicting at this point this is going to be 2 parts, maybe 3, but it's looking like 2. It depends on how sidetracky I get, I suppose. What we're going to go over in depth is the timeline and the affidavit related to this investigation. These episodes will be followed by a series on Patreon, which will include the interrogation audio. Possibly. I'm not quite sure how much I'll be able to upload to Patreon in terms of duration. I might have to break down the audio clips depending on how much content I'm able to include in one post. And of course, each of those will be followed by the usual recap and discussion of those interrogations, so you won't have to listen to them if you don't want to. And you don't necessarily have to be a patron to get the full story, which you're going to be getting here. But this time, we're going to do the deep dive into the interrogations over there as premium bonuses. And like I said in the beginning, this was a very brutal murder carried out by a stepmom, a person entrusted with taking care of this child while his father was off serving in the National Guard. It's difficult to think of the pain and the terror that this child was subjected to as he was being murdered. It's going to become very clear when I tell you about what was done to him. This is Gannon's story.
Well, 667 Linden Drive, Colorado Springs. Okay, so that one looks like a turn up with her correctly. 667 Linden Drive. Okay, so number you're calling from? 843 557460. Is your name? Feedback. Please tell me, sir. What happened? I didn't know if I'm supposed to call emergency or not emergency about that. My phone says you all at 6 o'clock and it's almost 7. And we went to like one friend's house and he's going to do the friend's house and they said he wasn't there and the other one said he never came there. So I don't know any other people calling out and I talked to my husband, so I told him I had to tell you guys as fast as I could because I don't know anyone else. And I don't know if there's like a time limit, but like he's only 11. He's 11. 11, yeah. Okay. What's his name? Gannon. What for me? G-A-N-N again. Nora. Stauch. S-T-A-U-C-H. I can go, guys. I got it hard. I can go away. And if you have multiple questions, we have to ask them. We don't want to try up to the person. You're not a person. Yeah, I'm never fine. That's why I didn't know what she wanted to do. Yeah, you go. That's okay. I'm going to get ready for that number. Okay, go ahead. 713. Okay. Can you put the phone 219 390 390 5555. Okay. You're welcome. Call that now. Call that now. I already have the call, Bill. We have multiple things to ask. So, we'll call back tomorrow. Where we left off. I think I can I get back to the city? How can I help you? Hi, yes. I called 911, and they said I had to call the Stepmother because I let you know so I guess I'm on the exit. But we didn't. I know it's not in 7, but like we went to both the police house and they said he wasn't there. And it was kind of like the thing and stuff. I was like, what's not there? Maybe around like what time you guys go to do? Is it 3:30 maybe? Between 3:30 and 4, and he was supposed to be home at 6. We met him all the time, like go to the neighbor's house, his house, they ride bikes and everything together. And we're on Christmas, and I guess me.
On January 27, 2020, a 911 call came into the El Paso County Sheriff's Department from a 36-year-old wife, mom, and stepmom, Letecia Stauch. She was calling to report her 11-year-old stepson, Gannon Stauch, missing. Letecia claimed that Gannon left their Colorado Springs home sometime between 3:15 and 4 p.m. Letecia said that Gannon left on foot and failed to come home when he was expected to, and thus began this heartbreaking case. When it comes to the woman who became the prime suspect almost right away, but really not soon enough since it feels like so much was overlooked at the beginning of this case, Letecia was quite the slippery character. And I've said it several times about Gannon's stepmom, Letecia. I said it a lot, I think, in the Teresa Stone series. She has this incredible way of being able to say so much, but at the same time, not saying anything useful at all. It's actually quite impressive when you really sit down and listen to this woman try to wiggle her way out of trouble. And we will be going over several of Letecia's interviews. There's one with the El Paso County Sheriff's Office in Colorado, and there's one with the FBI, I want to say about a month and a half later, in South Carolina. That part of the story is going to end up on Patreon, like I told you, because what I'm going to try to do is go back to the one and done episodes here in the free show so we can move through a variety of cases more quickly. I do recognize that some of the listeners like the interrogation audio uploads, some of you don't, so I always make sure to produce a follow-up episode where only I talk about the contents of the interrogation and share some ideas and opinions about what's being said, whether or not it's truthful. And those are always going to be written and recorded in such a way that you will get all the information from those interrogations without actually having to listen to them. I also titled the episode so you'll be able to tell the difference, but the audio clips will always come first, and it will specify that you're going to be listening to audio recordings, and the follow-up will specify that we're going to be talking about the interrogation and what happened when that suspect was being questioned in those interview rooms. That being said, let's just start with a timeline of this case, and this information will be coming from a pretty comprehensive outline of the case that I found on Reddit, as well as Letecia's probable cause affidavit that ultimately secured the warrant for her arrest. So let me first tell you about the main people involved in this story, and as we go through, I will consistently remind you of who I'm talking about and their place in the family. First, there's Letecia. She was born Letecia Harden on August 4th, 1983. Reddit says the year she was born was 83. The affidavit says 83, but the Wikipedia says 84. So I'm going to go with the majority and say that she was born in 83 and today is 41 years old. At the time that this case took place, she would have been 36, going on 37, at the time that Gannon was reported missing. When the story began to unfold, January 27th, 2020, Letecia was married to Albert Stauch. He was born September 20th, 1982, making him 37 at the time, 42 years old today. Letecia herself had one biological child, a daughter named Harley Hunt. She was born May 1st, 2002, making her 17 years old at the time that this took place, and today, Harley would be 22. I'm not 100% sure if Letecia was ever married to Harley's father, whose name was Chance Hunt, but sometime in 2008, when their daughter was around 6 years old, the couple separated. But on October 2nd, 2014, Chance Hunt passed away. At the time, he was living in Cincinnati, Ohio. When I looked around just on Google searching, I didn't find out very much information about him, but on Reddit, it did say that he died of an overdose. So getting back to the timeline, about 2 years after separating from Harley's dad, Letecia began working as a teacher with the Horry County School District in South Carolina. Horry County is also where Gannon was born. Albert and Gannon's biological mother, Landon, who began dating in 2003, got married sometime in 2005. Both Gannon and his sister, Lena, were preemies. Gannon specifically was born 4 months premature and required prolonged medical care as a result. Fast forward to 2013, sometime that year, Albert and Letecia met. It seems as though they met while playing softball. At the time, Albert did not have custody of his children. Both Albert and Letecia were living in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. In early 2014, the two of them officially began dating. Sometime in January of that year, however, Albert would later say that they began dating a little bit later on in the year, late spring, early summerish, and at the time Albert and Landon were separated. It would be in 2014 when Albert met Letecia's daughter Harley, making her about 12 years old at the time. Gannon would have been 6 and Lena was only 2. Albert and Landon became separated in September of 2014. I want to say I think it's fair to say that Albert's relationship with Letecia began as an affair. There is unconfirmed information online that Albert and Landon's marriage was fraught with infidelity on both of their parts. However, Albert would later on say that when he started seeing Letecia, he and Landon were separated. If you have some familiarity with this case, then you know how big of an issue it was for Letecia and how much concern she had with Albert's philandering, which we will talk about as we progress, though it's not going to be the center point of the story. But from all that I could say, it's pretty easy to assume that Albert had a history of infidelity. But you know, if Letecia knew Albert was married with children when she started seeing him, then she had to have understood the notion that if he cheats with you, then he'll cheat on you. I'm not going to say that that's most definitely, but I will go out on a limb and say more likely than not he'll do it again, which I believe he did. And it cuts both ways. I'm not trying to man bash today, but yeah, Albert Stauch is not the most sympathetic person in the world, but he certainly didn't deserve what ended up happening. So Albert and Letecia's relationship moved along pretty quickly, and before the end of 2014, the couple had moved in together to a home in Charleston, South Carolina, and that is when all three of their children began visiting. I mentioned that the legal separation between Albert and Landon happened in September of 2014, and less than a month later, Harley's father passed away from that drug overdose. A couple of months later, in January of 2015, Letecia and Albert got married. And just 6 months later, on June 29, 2015, Letecia resigned from her teaching job, and in short order, they moved back to Myrtle Beach. However, an interesting thing would happen with Letecia the following year. On May 11, 2016, Letecia's license to teach was suspended by the school district. Letecia framed it as being a conflict between her and the school district that she had been employed with, but the official reason for the suspension of her teaching license was job abandonment. I don't know if Albert was aware of that situation or how much he knew. From what I could tell, and from what I've seen of Letecia and her behavior, I wouldn't put it past her to try and hide this from Albert. It seems like it would have been a huge red flag if he was in the know about her having abandoned her position with the school district. But Albert strikes me as a type of dad who is a good provider, but isn't as present as he maybe could have been. But I don't know. He was in the military, so that's to be expected. Letecia should have known that he would be gone a lot. My own dad was like that. He was in the Navy, and he just really wasn't around much when he was married to his first wife. He loved having a job that took him all over the world. He loved living in foreign countries, but it took a toll on his first marriage. The relationship between Albert and Letecia did progress quickly, so maybe Letecia didn't really understand how challenging it was going to be a military wife, mom, and stepmom. It's a lot to deal with, and in hindsight, knowing what we know about Letecia, it was like the beginning of a countdown, like she was a ticking time bomb. It would only be a matter of time before she exploded. About 1 month after Letecia's license to teach was suspended, Albert accepted a job assignment that would take him to Alaska, and by 2017, he was up there by himself, and his children would come to visit him during the summer months when they were out of school, but for the rest of the year, their mother Landon had them. Letecia was not pleased with this living situation. In fact, she was irate about it. She made it abundantly clear that she did not like this job assignment that Albert accepted, and it really begins to feel like this is when the fabric of Letecia's mental and emotional stability began to fray. In March of 2017, because of suspected drug activity and a checkered history of his ex-wife's new boyfriend, Albert petitioned the family court for a custody modification, seeking full custody of Gannon and Lena. A year later, in March of 2018, a new custody order was issued by the court. I don't know if any of you have listened to any of the recordings related to this case, but there will be several recorded phone calls between Letecia and Albert in the days and weeks following Gannon's disappearance. And in at least one of those calls, you can hear a very desperate Letecia trying to keep her family together and Albert on her side as the investigation into Gannon's disappearance began to focus on her. You can hear her screaming into the phone how much she fought for Gannon, that she fought for Albert, with him, for custody of his children, which he was ultimately granted. I get the feeling that Letecia had no idea what she was getting herself into, or how much having all 3 children under one roof with Albert thousands of miles away somewhere in the Alaskan tundra was going to impact her mentally, emotionally, and psychologically. At this point, we are less than 2 years out from Gannon going missing, but Letecia's unraveling has most certainly begun. She could have been unraveling for years, but was able to appear as if everything was okay on the outside. But very little about Letecia was ever okay with any of this situation that she found herself in. Like I said, Letecia made no secret of the fact that she hated Alaska. There was an incident that occurred during this time frame when, having dinner one evening, Letecia told her daughter Harley that was going to be the last meal that they would have together because she, quote, already took them. She didn't say what she took, but again, knowing what we know about Letecia today, it was probably not a serious threat. But telling her own daughter, who was about 16 years old at the time, that was going to be their last meal and insinuated that she had taken something is hugely disturbing. Nothing came of it. Letecia got up the next day, as she normally did. She was alive and unharmed, and this incident was never spoken about again. In the same time frame, sometime in late 2018, going into 2019, Letecia was visiting Albert in Alaska when she accused several of Albert's fellow soldiers of sexual harassment. Is that they're called yeah, I think Albert referred to himself as a soldier in the Army National Guard. So fellow soldiers, is that the right term? Comrades? Whatever you call them. Comrades sounds a little communist-ish for some reason. But anyway, Letecia made these allegations and filed an official complaint. The solution that was reached was Albert would be reassigned back down to the lower 48, specifically to Colorado Springs, Colorado, which is the backdrop of our story today. Again, knowing all we know about Letecia with hindsight at work once again. Sorry, that was my dog shaking off. Anyway, back to hindsight. I don't believe for 1 minute that anyone ever sexually harassed Letecia. I like giving people the benefit of the doubt sometimes, but the woman made it clear that she hated Alaska and was very unhappy that Albert accepted that assignment, and I think she came up with a way to cause Albert to be reassigned, and it worked. Looking back at all this, knowing how this story ends, all these red flags are popping up on both sides of this, both with Albert going after full custody of his kids due to suspected substance abuse in Landon's home where she was living with her new boyfriend, Harley's dad having an overdose, Letecia losing her teaching license due to job abandonment, her unhappiness with Albert living in Alaska. And it's been reported through several sources that she didn't just not like Alaska, she hated Alaska. And with Letecia having begun a relationship with Albert while he was still married, it is likely the idea of Albert being in Alaska and her not being able to control what he does or where he goes, it continues to perpetuate Letecia's mental and emotional decline. So I believe that she came up with this plan to get Albert relocated by filing sexual harassment complaints against his coworkers. And it worked. Like I said, Letecia got her way. In January of 2019, Albert, Letecia, and Harley officially moved from Myrtle Beach to Colorado Springs. Lena and Gannon will also move that same month into a rented home. The next month, in February of 2019, Albert officially leaves his assignment in Alaska, moving with Letecia and the kids there to Colorado Springs. So now everybody is under the same roof. In May of 2019, while doing some woodworking, one of Albert's hobbies, he accidentally severed the tip of one of his fingers, As a part of his treatment and recovery, he was given a prescription of hydrocodone. He does not use the whole prescription and keeps the leftover pills in his nightstand. It was sometime during 2019 when Letecia began making allegations that Gannon had threatened her. So both Gannon and Lena were taken to see a counselor, with much of the focus being on Gannon's therapy and whatever issues that he seemed to have with Letecia. Again, I don't know if Gannon actually threatened Letecia or not. Based on what we know about her and her history, these allegations are most likely false or at the very least embellished. Letecia has a way of making situations in and around the family all about herself, and it usually includes her being a victim of some sort of wrongdoing on everybody else's part but her own. So in short order, she lost her daughter's father to a drug overdose. She's lost her teaching license due to job abandonment. She's forced Albert's relocation to Colorado with allegations of sexual harassment. And now she's making allegations that Gannon was threatening her. And at the time, the boy was only 10, going on 11. Now, getting into the late months of 2019, fall going into winter, there were a number of things, or allegations made, I should say, made by Letecia. She reported having been in some kind of car accident that fall or winter. She said she was involved in a hit and run, but police have stated that there was no such accident that they were aware of involving Letecia. Also during this time period, Letecia claimed that their Colorado Springs home had been burglarized or that there was a burglar who gained entry into their home. Later on, Letecia would admit that the story was a fabrication. Also in the same time period, Letecia was hired as a teacher at French Elementary School in Colorado Springs, but she very quickly began to struggle at work. She began seeing a specialist regarding unspecified mental health concerns. Albert went with Letecia for a doctor's visit once. The family also adopted 2 bulldogs they named Sadie and Chance. In December of 2019, Letecia and Albert celebrated Christmas early with the kids as they were scheduled to be with their mom for the holidays. Also during this month, in an odd move, Letecia got on Facebook using her daughter's name, Harley. She met a neighbor named Nicole Mobley, and her name will come up again later on in this story, but I will remind you of who she is when we get to it. She met this neighbor, Nicole Mobley, who received free clothing from Letecia and Harley for her niece. She had made a post about looking for clothing donations on their neighborhood Facebook page. Like I said, I'll talk more about this neighbor later on. Letecia decided around this time to also make a career change, as it was pretty clear the woman was not cut out for teaching. She definitely took the wrong career path. So she decided she wanted to become a flight attendant. Well, thank God that never happened, because you imagine flying around in the air with this woman helping you? Yeah, that's a freaky thought. Right after Christmas of 2019, Letecia flew to wherever it was she needed to go for flight attendant training, but it was difficult for her to find help with childcare while she was required to travel for this job since Albert's position at the time had him working nights. So Letecia postponed flight attendant training until February of 2020. Gannon and Lena returned to Colorado Springs from visiting their mom for the holidays in early January of 2020. Winter break ended and the children were back in school. It was also during the month of January of 2020 that Albert and Letecia celebrated their 5th wedding anniversary with a romantic trip to Florida without the kids. Letecia hired a babysitter who took care of all 3 kids while they were on vacation. So now the dates in this timeline are going to start becoming more specific as we edge closer to the day that Gannon was reported missing. On January 16, 2020, the assistant principal of Mountain Ridge Middle School at the time contacted Letecia in regards to her having expressed interest in a job opening at that school for a resource teaching position for special needs children or children with individualized education programs. 2 days later, on January 18, 2020, Albert's mother came to visit and stayed there in the family home. During her stay, things between Letecia and Albert were very tense. And 4 days later, on January 22, 2020, Letecia was scheduled to interview at Mountain Ridge Middle School. Also on that day, Letecia began a probationary period working with those special needs children. On January 24, 2020, which was a Friday, Gannon was in attendance at school that day. Albert and Landon spoke on the phone per usual as a part of their regular routine in keeping Gannon and Lena's mom up to speed on things involving the children. But something else quite significant happened on that day. Letecia was contacted by the school district to inform her that they were not going to be hiring her for the resource specialist at the middle school after a check of her references and resume. In a Reddit post, there was a note next to the timeline that I referenced that said, "This move on the part of the school district might be an attempt on their part to retroactively cover themselves for even letting Letecia anywhere near the students before having fully ran a check on her background and references." But that Friday, the school's assistant principal did see Letecia working at the school that day, but did not know yet the school district did not offer her the job. I'm going to try to find out what it was Letecia falsified on her resume and references. I'm not quite sure yet. I can't recall at the moment, but if it comes out in the timeline, I will reference it again. I found a small article on the independent.co.uk where it listed some lesser known facts about Letecia. She had one shoplifting arrest in South Carolina back in 2006. Letecia had previously worked as a special education teacher at one time, but was fired in 2019 for allegedly mistreating a student. And that Letecia had a long history of making false accusations, including having falsely accused a previous husband of domestic battery. Later on, when we get to the probable cause affidavit, there's going to be more in her criminal background that we'll talk about. So yeah, any number of things could have been discovered causing the school district to decide against hiring Letecia, a decision that came just 2 days before Gannon would go missing. On Saturday, January 25th, 2020, Albert worked during the day that day. He spoke to Landon per usual. After work, Albert came home. He had dinner with the family, and from there, he drove his mother to the airport for her return trip home from her visit with him and the kids. Albert decided to stay at the airport. And at the time that I wrote this, I wasn't for sure, but after reading the affidavit, I know for sure that he drove his mom to the Denver airport, which is almost an hour and a half away from Colorado Springs. He had a flight the next morning for his next assignment. I can't remember off the top of my head where he flew to. I believe I heard him say during his testimony that he had flown to Oklahoma. I can't recall. I wrote that I would fix this all up if I do figure it out, and I did. It is Oklahoma. And all of that is to say is that I'm sure that this made Letecia increasingly unhappy. Remember, she went into the weekend being denied a teaching position at the middle school. She even started working with the children already when they, for all intents and purposes, pulled the rug out from underneath her. However, having some kind of understanding of what Letecia was like, the job was probably never really hers to lose to begin with. The school just took her at face value. Everyone seems to have taken Letecia at face value in the beginning, because to an extent, she did give off an air of normalcy when the truth was there was very little, if anything, normal about this woman. And it only gets weirder as we go along. Also on that same day, Saturday, January 25th, just 2 days before Gannon went missing, Letecia made a Google search at 12:16 p.m. that read, "Find real military singles." At 1:40 p.m., Letecia Googled, "Parenting should be 4 people, not 1." So we can see that there was something troubling going on with Letecia. She was turned down for a job. She had been hosting her mother-in-law for a week, which is almost never fun for your average stable or semi-stable person. But for someone who was clearly falling apart on the inside, it's likely that it was much, much worse for Letecia. I don't know. It's kind of hard to pinpoint what exactly is wrong with her, aside from everything being wrong with her, but I'm not a mental health expert. However, Letecia seems to feel like she needs to compete with everyone around her in her life. She seems to be threatened by the people in Albert's life, his ex-wife, his kids, his mother, his job. Everything Albert does appears to be some sort of trigger for her. But Letecia started this relationship with Albert knowing that she was starting off as the other woman, and that was always going to be something hanging over her. So here she is, stuck at home with the 3 kids. The mother-in-law is about to finally leave. Albert's off to fly for another assignment, and the ticking time bomb is still counting down. Right after Letecia Googled parenting should be 4 people, not 1, she then Googled, I'm overdoing all the work for my stepkids and their mom doesn't help. A minute later at 1:41 p.m., Letecia Googled, mom advice from stepmom. At 1:48 p.m., she Googled, if you aren't involved in your kid's life, you are shitty. At 1:49 p.m., Letecia searched, my husband's ex-wife does nothing for her kids. At 1:51 p.m., she Googled, I wondered if my ex-husband's wife is sending me a card since I raise her kids. A minute later, she searched, I wonder if my husband's ex-wife is sending me a Valentine's Day card since I raise her kids. At 1:54 p.m., she searched, one day some people will wish they treat me differently. About an hour and a half later, at 3:35, Letecia searched, why should my husband choose me over family? The family had dinner, and Albert left for the night to take his mom to the airport. He's spending the night there that night for his own flight the next morning. After Albert and his mom left at 7:57 p.m., Letecia hit Google back up and searched, find me a rich guy who wants me to take care of his kids. A minute later, Letecia searched, find a guy who wants me to take care of his kids and get paid. So it kind of sounds like Letecia is concerned about her financial situation on top of her unhappiness as her role as a wife, mom, and stepmother. The next morning, January 26, 2020, which is a Sunday, Albert flew to Oklahoma for 2 weeks of training. And like I told you in the beginning, to put this into context, this is when we all started to receive the news alerts that morning on January 26th that Kobe Bryant was killed along with his daughter, the pilot, and 6 other passengers in that helicopter crash. At 2 p.m. that afternoon, Letecia, Gannon, and Lena went hiking at a place called Garden of the Gods. I've listened to Letecia's interview with the El Paso County Sheriff's Office, which is going to happen, I believe, within 2 days of this hike to Garden of the Gods. She's going to be in there answering questions about Gannon. She's going to start off her interview by telling the detectives about this hike to Garden of the Gods numerous times. She points it out almost too many times, and I think the reasons why is to again portray herself as your normal, average, everyday mom/stepmom doing normal, average, everyday activities with her kids. They went hiking and they took a selfie. Letecia's own daughter, Harley, did not join them as she got called into her job at Massage Envy that afternoon. At 9:25 a.m., Letecia Googled the following: parents are those who put their kids before their nails. So what exactly does that mean? Perhaps she caught Gannon and Lena's mom, Landon, with a fresh mani-pedi. Maybe she saw pictures of her on social media. Maybe she saw her post something about being at the nail salon. She's doing her thing. She's enjoying herself. She's living her best life since Letecia views herself as the one stuck with her kids. And a lot of the time, much of that is without help from Albert. I've seen both him and Landon criticized online for not being as present as they could have been or should have been for Gannon, and that because of that, they are in part responsible for what happened to him. That sort of stuff happens. It's not going to happen here, I promise you. There's nothing about the situation that they caused at all whatsoever, and I don't blame them at all. So we'll put that out there right now. But it does happen, like James Bulger, the toddler in England who was killed by those two 10-year-olds back in the 1990s. His mother was widely criticized for taking her eyes off her son and opening up a window of opportunity for him to wander and to ultimately be walked away by these two older boys. And in a personal story, I had a friend many, many years ago. She was walking with her two of her three children in the Costco parking lot when an F-150 began backing up and literally ran over her 3-year-old daughter. The child survived just by pure luck of the way the truck's rear tire rolled over her body. It literally folded the 3-year-old in half. While her pelvis and one femur was broken, nothing internal, no vital organs were injured. And that's because she was still a little bit of a toddler, so her legs and thighs are really super chubby and they're flexible. And in a way, they protected her torso. And because mom began screaming, the truck stopped before the tire ran over her head. And I know that sounds terrible the way that I just told it, but that's how it was described to me. While in the back of my mind, I was horrified and really worried, I had thoughts about my friend, the mom, who wasn't keeping a close eye on her children. She was with 2 of her 3 kids. The oldest one was in school at the time, and these 2 were still preschool aged. She wasn't holding their hands. She didn't have them in the shopping cart. And I did have those thoughts of kind of blaming her for not supervising her kids properly in a very busy Costco parking lot. But I never said it to her, However, her parents did, the grandparents of the child who was hit by the car. They very harshly blamed their daughter for what happened, and they made no secret of it, how they felt. So Anyway, what all of that's to say, what I get from that last Google search, parents who put their kids before their nails, I don't know what she was hoping to find when she made these searches, but I think it was on the behavior panel, those 4 guys that talk about people's body language and behavior. They remarked that Letecia seemed to be using Google like a therapy session. She had these ideas and these issues floating around in her head. So in order to get it out of her head, she tapped around on Google on her phone for whatever it seemed that popped into her mind at that moment. According to Letecia's telling of that Sunday afternoon around 4:20 p.m., she was forced to end that hike earlier than she had anticipated because she claimed Gannon began experiencing stomach issues. A little more than an hour later, at 5:48 p.m., Letecia, Gannon, and Lena returned home from that hike. Sometime during that afternoon or evening, Albert received a text message that he thought was from Gannon telling him about his stomach problems. The reason that I say Albert thought the messages were from Gannon is because it had been strongly suggested in the ensuing days and weeks that Letecia was the one who sent those messages to Albert from Gannon's phone. Gannon supposedly asked his dad in those text messages if they had any bath salt. Albert suspected he might be asking about the designer synthetic drug, not actual salt for the bath like Epsom salt or whatever. This raised concerns with Albert, so he sent a text message to Letecia asking her to hide their bath products out of the reach of the kids. He then told Gannon, if it was Gannon texting him, that he did not have permission to go over to his friend's house, as his friend had supposedly invited him over on the condition that Gannon bring bath salts with him. One of the things that occurred allegedly is referred to in this case as the candle incident. It's really difficult to understand or know exactly what happened, so I'm going to try to get as in-depth as I can with it, but it's one of the first things I remember hearing about this case and thinking, that's a bunch of bullshit. This candle incident story is really, really suspicious. So on the last evening that Gannon was seen or even known to be alive, Letecia, fortunately or unfortunately, or both even, immortalized what happened with this candle thing by way of a video she took with her cell phone. The story was that after they got home from that hike, Gannon was having all kinds of stomach issues, apparently diarrhea. Other iterations of the story involve Gannon just basically having potty accidents and maybe a bloody nose, bloody bowel movements, vomiting. I mean, this kid's just got all these problems. Things of that sort. Just him, just randomly sick all over the place. So Letecia alleged in order to help cover up the smell of all of these bodily fluids Gannon was apparently having pouring out of every orifice, he lit a candle and at some point accidentally knocked it over or caused it to ignite the carpeting someplace in the home. I've heard so many different versions about what happened inside that house, most of them, if not all of them, having come from Letecia, so much so that I'm still somewhat confused as to what all of this meant. After I go over the details of this candle incident, we'll see if we can make any sense of it, maybe even more towards the end of this story. But first, let's listen to the audio of this candle incident video that Letecia made. I'll play it for you, but I have to warn you, it is really heartbreaking to hear Gannon crying out about the injuries that he has. I will provide you with timestamps to fast forward if you choose to listen to it. I want to say it's going to be about 60 seconds. So I would fast forward about a minute and a half, and then I'll tell you what was said. So this is the recording Letecia made just prior to Gannon going missing the following day. Fast forward, like I said, about a minute and a half if you want to skip this.
Well, devastating. Initially, Scott, I can't lie when the TMZ information...
Gannon, I promise this is the last time I'm going to ask you. I'm just freaked out, okay? Are you sure you didn't do it on purpose?
He did it.
Okay, you promise. You promise.
On purpose.
Pinky promise.
Pinky.
Okay, all right, so listen. We're going to have to sell stuff to fix it, okay? So we figure out what we got to sell. We can sell the sofa. We can sell whatever, because we got to get it fixed so the lady don't be mad at us and kick us out of the house. Okay? You got it?
So yeah, it was awful. You can see that Letecia is holding the phone down by her side. So it seems as if she's trying to film Gannon surreptitiously. Everything looks like it's being filmed upside down. Letecia walks into the room where Gannon is laying down, and I guess in some capacity he's burned or injured or something's wrong with him. The first things we hear is Letecia speaking, but it kind of comes in mid-sentence and she says something along the lines of, "I just don't know what to do." The video continues to move through the room as she approaches a very upset and distraught Gannon. Then you hear Letecia say, "Gannon, I promise this is the last time I'm going to ask you. I'm just freaked out, okay?" You can hear some trembling in Letecia's voice, but if you ask me, it's probably just her being dramatic and acting. So when she says that she promises that this is the last time that I'm going to ask you, it leads us to surmise that she had been discussing this and talking to Gannon about this incident for quite some time before she decided to turn on her camera. And that would lead us to speculate that she has coached him as to what to say on the video. She might be trying to prove that Gannon did something bad, or to make whatever this incident was appear to be all his fault. She says that she's freaked out. What is she freaked out about? Well, we know that Gannon is injured. He says as much at some point. They know that he's injured in this video. He is crying. He's clearly in pain, and there's something very, very wrong. One of the first things that came to my mind is that Letecia did something that caused a very serious injury on Gannon, and maybe she tried to burn him to cover it up. I mean, she could have hit him or caused him some kind of contusion, or she did something. And I don't know, it seems really harsh to think about, like her actually purposely causing him a burn. I read in a comment thread on Reddit that Letecia's daughter would later on say that she believed Gannon accidentally caught his blanket on fire from the candle, and that's how he got burned on his arm, supposedly. But this has been largely dismissed as more coaching by Letecia, her coaching her daughter this time. Letecia will go on to have plenty of time with Harley in order to get her to say whatever it is that she needs her to say, to coach her, to gaslight her, to feed her own daughter lies, so Letecia can have at least one witness to corroborate all the stories that she's about to start throwing around at everybody. So we know Gannon was injured pretty badly, and he is sobbing in the video as Letecia here puts all this pressure on him about what she is alleging he did. The next thing you hear Letecia say is, "Are you sure you didn't do it on purpose?" You will hear Gannon cry out, "Yeah." Letecia then says, "Okay, not on purpose," he says. "You promise?" And Gannon says, "Promise, I did not on purpose." She says back to him, "Pinky promise?" And the only word that Gannon can muster is pinky. And then Letecia says, "Okay, all right, so listen, all right, we're going to have to sell stuff to fix it, okay?" This is one of the most talked about things regarding this video, aside from the fact that you can literally hear Gannon sobbing in the background almost the whole time. I don't know if he knows he's headed straight to his death, but if nothing else, you can hear and feel the terror that this child is experiencing during these moments that Letecia is complaining to him about what he supposedly did and what he needs to do to fix it. An 11-year-old telling him that he needs to go sell stuff to fix the carpet. So after she says that we're going to have to sell stuff to fix it, Gannon sobs, "Okay." And then she says to him, "What are we going to sell? We can sell the sofa, we can sell whatever, because we got to get it fixed or Lady is going to kick us out of the house." I think she might be talking about the homeowner or whoever they're renting from, because this is a rental house. So Letecia is leading Gannon to believe that the burns in the carpet or whatever is all his fault, that they're going to have to sell stuff in order to get money to fix it. And if he doesn't figure out what they're going to do, they're going to get kicked out of the house and have no place to live. From there, you can hear Gannon crying a little bit more. You can hear him cough, and then the video cuts out. I've thought a lot about what this video meant in the moment, and it's really difficult to figure or to try to think about why Letecia even filmed this in the first place. But if nothing else, whatever her reasoning or purpose, we do know that it was completely self-serving. But I think the whole thing backfired on her, because all it did was solidify for everyone looking at this case is that she harmed Gannon, and these are the beginning stages of her attempts at a cover-up. She's hiding the fact that she's filming. We don't really get any clear images of Gannon, nor see if there's anything wrong with him. However, I would submit to you that we don't need to see it. We can hear it. It's clear that this child is in a lot of pain. The fact that Letecia is really standing over this child, recording this and telling him that she needs to know that he did not do this on purpose. So if she did in fact cause him some serious injury just before she started filming, then what she's doing to Gannon is literally blaming him for his own injuries and putting the responsibility on him to get the money to get the damage to the house fixed, or else they're going to be homeless. Letecia is not in the least bit concerned, nor does she have any compassion or regard for the fact that this child is terrified and in a tremendous amount of pain. She's pressuring him, hovering over him, hovering around him, making him come up with solutions to solve his own problems, fix his own damage, but forgets the fact that he's seriously injured in some manner. We, just as basic human beings, we don't even have to be moms and dads or have anything really to do with children to come to the conclusion that there is something extremely wrong with this interaction between Gannon and Letecia. The way Letecia is talking to him, the way she's blaming him and threatening him that they're going to be kicked out of the house if he doesn't fix the carpet, is just so cruel. Letecia recorded this interaction for a reason, and that reason had to be beneficial to her in some way in her own mind. Letecia Stauch doesn't do anything unless it serves her needs and her purposes. If I had to guess, I'd say with a good degree of certainty that Letecia is covering up an act of child abuse that caused an injury that Gannon's biological parents can't find out about. Either that, or she's coming up with a fairy tale about what happened in that house, and the purpose of the video is to support whatever narrative she comes up with regarding whatever it was that happened. And whatever it was, it has clearly caused Gannon a great deal of pain and fear. We feel it when we hear him. Like many, if not all of you listening, felt it if you listened to that audio clip. What I think most likely happened is that Gannon did something that caused Letecia to snap. She then did something that injured Gannon. She may have even burned him herself. And she's coming to the realization that this time this is too serious for her to just phone up his mom and dad and tell him that Gannon has a blistering, oozing burn on his arm. I've already talked about Letecia's mindset going into this final weekend in January of 2020. She just had to host her mother-in-law for a week, which she did not want to have to do, causing a great deal of tension in the home. Albert is off again for 2 weeks of training. We know Letecia has issues with being separated from Albert for extended periods of time, and not just because of his track record of infidelity, but also for leaving her to watch the kids the whole time on her own. And I mean, this is what she signed up for when she decided to marry Albert. She knew he came with kids. She knew that he was in the military. So his job would involve a lot of traveling, and she's likely been resentful of Landon, Gannon's biological mom. I think that's clear through her Google searches. She's been resentful of her for a long time, and those feelings of resentment maybe now are spilling over into her feelings towards Gannon. She may or may not have any resentment towards Albert, but ultimately, I believe Letecia's goal is to do everything she can to get Albert to pay more attention to her, if not give her all of his attention. As we get to know Letecia and her ways, we're going to see that she has a very long history of making false stories and portraying herself out to be a victim at every turn. She's always the victim, even going so far as to accuse 11-year-old Gannon himself of threatening her in some kind of way, leading the family to begin taking him and Lena to see a therapist. The candle may have been a part of what happened when Letecia did whatever she did to harm Gannon. Maybe it knocked over when she was abusing him. Maybe something did fall into the wick and catch fire. But I think the candle was secondary to the actual incident, a part of Letecia's scramble to cover it up, whatever she did. Maybe Letecia was in the process of abusing Gannon and the candle fell and broke or spilled. Maybe She purposely dumped wax on him and made him think he did it. Whatever it was that happened, I'm pretty sure Letecia is the one who caused it, and what she was doing was actively bullying him into taking the blame for it all the while secretly filming him. It's also possible that Gannon maybe did knock over a candle or did something to cause a mess so bad that the quickest and fastest way to get rid of a mess, say like spilled blood, is to burn it. It's possible that Letecia did something to Gannon that caused a bleeding event, that blood got on the carpet, and the quickest way to get rid of it for good would be to burn it. Maybe he did spill the candle. It seems like it would be a difficult thing to catch fire from, a knocked over candle. The biggest problem would probably be the wax, I'd think. Even though it may have been an accident, knocking over a candle, the wick will automatically go out, you would think, right? But knowing what we know about Letecia's state of mind that weekend, it's likely she flew into a sudden outburst and was immediately filled with all kinds of rage and became out of control. And as a result, she inflicted injuries on Gannon that she knew she would never be able to come back from. She took things too far and caused something to happen to Gannon that she had no way of getting out of it when it came to his parents. So perhaps she filmed this video in order to make sure that whatever Albert finds in the house when he got home, that she could blame it all on Gannon. I would even say that's the same reason why later on she would take pictures of Gannon while he was asleep that same evening. She needed proof of life or something in order to bolster whatever story she was going to come up with. And Letecia is so focused on saving herself and the fact that she thinks that she's smarter than everybody else that she can't even begin to see just how messed up taking that video actually was. The optics of it are horrific, and Letecia just has no idea. This probably won't be the last time we talk about this. So as we make our way through the timeline and eventually the interrogation videos, perhaps some other ideas will come into focus and we can revisit this a little later on. All right, dreamers, this seems like a good place to stop. We got to a little over an hour into this story. I do like our episodes being more than an hour long, and I'm not even a third of the way through what I have written down in my notes just yet. But because I'm going to edit in some audio clips, it's going to take me a little bit more time to get this episode put together and uploaded. So I'll go ahead and pause the story here. I'll throw this together and get this out there for you to listen to, and then we'll move on to part 2. All right, we will be back soon. We'll pick up the story from what happens after this candle incident. I want to thank you all so much for listening. Happy New Year, everybody. Take care, be safe, and as always, sweet dreams.